At the end of the day, isn't it much simpler? Isn't it just about conflict to resources forever? I mean, since the old times to now.
Conflict for resources forever. Okay, but this is this thing. Let's go back to Socrates. Should you be willing to kill innocents for resources? Socrates says absolutely not. You should rather die than do that.
But we may all, I mean, again, I'm pushing it to the extreme. At some point, the lack of resources may make everyone die rather than just some people.
Everybody. Okay, let me take the extreme case. First of all, and what a big deal. We're all going to die, and we're taking. Humanity. Yeah, big deal. All of us are going to die. We're going to die. First of all, we are going to die one way or the other. We have to accept our mortality. Now, let me take very extreme case. You put an innocent child in front of me, and you say, if you now kill him, the world will survive another 1,000,000 years. If you don't, right now, tomorrow the world goes. What am I to do? I claim, for me, there is absolutely no issue. So the world goes, the world goes. I go with it, or, I cannot, there is no conceivable, this is a morality as it was defined by Socrates, Plato, and I claim the Bible. Not on the surface. This is hard. But in reality, the only sustainable position. Because the moment I say, well, if there is no, my position is the only logical position. Otherwise, it comes, what about for $1 million? What about for $1 billion? So you say, for $1 billion, yes. And then somebody says, well, that for a half, we get into a terrible thing. You do not want to allow any breach in this world. Doing evil is absolutely forbidden. You say, but I don't believe in God. It doesn't matter. I'm actually proud to say I have atheist friends who would agree with me. Paul, he agrees with me, right? So there are, fortunately, this is why there is hope for humanity, that, on all sides we're fine. By the way, there are Christians who would disagree with me. There are Jews who do disagree with me. There are Muslims who disagree with me. So the lines, again, the Amalek is internal. Right? So you cannot look at a person, determine what his confession is, and say, well, he's on the side of the angels. Not in this life. It's not, by the way, there are very evil atheists. It's not, it's not among my friends. But we have to once and for all realize that, we cannot, there are some lines we cannot cross.
And doesn't the killing of the animals sort of show that it's not about resources, or not, that there's, because if it was just about, this tribe wants to kill that tribe for the resources, then they would keep the animals. But it's more that there's a stronger...
Yes. Well, the question is that very, very good point from Nick, that it couldn't possibly be about resources because you wouldn't slaughter all the animals. But let me tell you, the amazing thing that right now, just about every single biblical scholar will say, but nothing like that ever happened. These texts were written at the time where there were no Canaanites and left, Amalekites were long extinct. These are just statements. Nevertheless, we have these statements, we have to rationalize them. The only rational explanation is this explanation of internal Amalek, of taking certain parts of the Bible and saying the only way they could be accepted is if we assign symbolic meaning. Right? I do not see any other solution, because the moment you allow extermination of whole tribes for good reason, and by the way, I'm going to say politically incorrect things. I'm not claiming that there is no hierarchy of tribes in the sense that, obviously I would prefer 5th century BC Greeks to just about any other tribe, like modern Greeks. So there were some exceptionally wonderful people. Sometimes you see a group of people which produces, you go to 15th century Florence, and it's just beyond words how wonderful they are. They produce more greatness per capita than anybody but Greeks. But I don't think that if I have a choice between Pequot Indians, who did not produce Michelangelo, and Florentines, I could say, okay, let's kill the Pequots. No. I cannot, there is radical equality. Radical equality means that, we're all unequal. Some of us are fatter, some of us are thinner, some of us are young, some of us are old, some of us are gifted, some of us not. We should not kill people because they're not gifted. We should not kill people because they're fat. I'm obviously for that. So, but we have to maintain absolute norms. We cannot say, well, but when my side is in danger, we could break the laws. No, you cannot. Again, even if the world disappears, you cannot kill a child. This is the only position. I do not see the moment you break, we end up with gas chambers. Because we decide who is to live, who is to die, and who is good, who is bad. No. And resources, yes, it's economically, it might be economically good to introduce cannibalism, eating each other. Some of you might have heard, we will cover him later in the course, Jonathan Swift, who proposed that Ireland was always very poor and they didn't have too much food. He said, you could easily resolve the problem. Let Irish eat their own babies. He was joking. But, no, let's let Irish not eat their own babies, even if it will save the environment. I claim that sort of certain things we cannot break, no matter whether it's resources, no matter. And again, am I representing whom I'm representing? Well, right now I'm representing Brian. He gave me authority to teach that. There is no great authority, and most governments will reject my point of view, at least in practice. They will say, well, but you don't really mean it. Yes, I actually do really mean it. They say, but even if your family is affected, even if my family is affected, if I and my family are affected, you cannot kill an innocent child saving my family. It's absolutely inexcusable.
How do you know the child is
Innocent? Well, I would say that you could safely assume that very few people under 3-year-old. 5? Well, again, I would right now sort of, it's a difficult thing. When do people become capable of realizing what is evil, what is good? It's a difficult question. There are no simple answers. By the way, I do think that death penalty should never be applied for people under 18. Well, in my case, I actually totally oppose death penalty. So but even if you have death penalty, I think that however horrible a crime person commits, till he is mature enough, I mean, you could keep him in jail for 50 years. That's perfectly fine. But, yes.
Saul tries to do good, and he interprets the requirements,
Yes.
what is expected of him.
Yes, Saul is trying to do good. By the way, it's a universal position of the rabbis that Saul was sort of like an innocent child, a very, very sort of good person at that point.
So my question is in terms of interpretation.
Yes.
And there are other cases, where sort of trying to do good leads you to a slippery slope.
Trying to do good. Okay, let me tell you. There is, if we ignore the nature of the thing he was ordered, the story is very simple. Basically, if God tells you to do something, if indeed God tells you to do something, you have to do that. You should not interpret it. Now, of course, I claim that God cannot order something like that. Say, but it's written. It's all, I mean, by the way, you have to understand that I'm walking on a very, very thin ice, right? Because I see the text. The text is unambiguous. So when I say I apply symbolic interpretation, why? Because it's so horrendous. But it's thin ice. I mean, you say, well, Alex, I have no choice. You might. There are some people who actually say certain passages need to be expunged. Right? There are people, I told you, Adolf Harnack, who was as great a mind as you could encounter. Marvelous, marvelous theologian. Not of of different sort of variety of theology, but absolutely great man. He was saying, let's forget Old Testament. I mean, it's just unacceptable. It's so tribal. Yes?
What if we applied the same kind of thinking to this text as we applied to Homer, where he was telling us a story and we were supposed to decide what is good and what is bad, and he was inspiring thinking about that?
That's good.
You can do the same thing for this, and you can say, well, that is absolutely horrendous, as you said, but you can take it as historical account and say, well...
Doesn't quite work. Works here. Very good question. Works here. Doesn't quite work in Deuteronomy, where it's stated as the law. You must do this and this and this, not as a historical account. When you go to 20th century, 20th chapter of Deuteronomy, where it explicitly gives it as a legal binding. So Bible is a complicated text. Not everything there is historical account, is a story. Not everything there is the law. And, but this sort of the notion of herem, that the 7 tribes have to be exterminated, seem to be, if we go, if I could find anything, it's all marked, but I have to find, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which you are entering to take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. 7. I have to and the 7 nations greater and mightier than yourself. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you, and you defeat them, then you must utterly destroy them. It's imperative. It's not. Right? So again, my thing, it's talking about not killing people. It cannot be ordering wholesale slaughter of people. Yes?
What do these modern people who believe in so-called biblical inerrancy think these things mean?
They think there are two. What do people who believe in biblical inerrancy think about these passages? The typical thing is, yes, that's A, that happened. B, God did command it. And C, God could overrule natural law. The positive command from God overrules. From my point of view, it just cannot be. God cannot contradict himself. He's the one who gave us natural law. Therefore, he cannot say, by the way, don't kill innocent people, but you could kill little Jebusite babies. But people who do believe in biblical inerrancy claim that the natural law was suspended during that time. By the way, it is not just, more sophisticated theologians throughout history of the church took this position. So when modern fundamentalists take this position, they're naive. Less naive people were taking similar position, sadly enough. Till very recently, very few people were horrified by this. This is, I have to tell you sort of the sad fact that the Americans in the 19th century were they bad people? No, they were not. Well, who am I to judge? But apparently a typical American, when he read in a newspaper, and these are stories from newspapers, that Indians are like Amalekites. They pester innocent farmers. They just do this thing. It was viewed as, yeah, of course, yeah. There was this famous statement about the only good Indian I met, all good Indians I met were dead Indians. People could say it or people could publish it, people could believe it. The notion that sort of killing innocent people is never, we do develop, sadly enough, and I don't know, I cannot even say if we do develop, because in 20th century we killed so many innocent people, and we're on the way of killing more in 21st. So, I do not know how easy it is, but historically it was not viewed, for me some of these passages are such that when I read them, when I was preparing for this lecture, I was losing sleep. It's not that I read them the first or the second time. I knew them, but just preparing, I threw away 31st chapter of Numbers from the suggested reading list. That's where you test for virgins. I just couldn't put it as recommended reading. You say, Alex, you cheated. No, since I was abridging, I could abridge whichever way I like. But there are things which I find just awful. Is it? But, we should not judge these people. He was first.
I was going to ask how these stories relate to the story of Abraham and Isaac. Again, this is a command, and I guess what's interesting to me is that's the story, with the religious upbringing. I heard Abraham and Isaac. I never heard these stories in Sunday school. So
they were there.
I'm sure they were in the book, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about let's keep the virgins in Sunday school might not be, exactly what. Or maybe the other way around. I don't know about your Sunday school. Yes, it's a very difficult text. Yes.
But in that case, Abraham doesn't sacrifice. It was commanded.
He doesn't. These are very difficult texts, and I have to tell you that it's not anybody who is going to say that there are some simple explanations. Okay, what's the most famous atheist name now? No, the first one. Dawkins, thank you. So Dawkins wrote an article, I forget, maybe Guardian, I forget where it was, endorsing the idea of giving the Bible to every school child in England, King James. And his argument was that then they will see what the religion is about. Okay, while I do not endorse everything Dawkins says, he has a point there. This is a difficult text. It's not going to, it's not a sweet and wonderful story for children. No. And you have to struggle. You have to struggle with it one way or the other. It's a disturbing book. Yes?
So you draw a distinction between killing innocent people or civilians and military people killing other soldiers.
Yes. Yes.
But during war, a lot of civilians and innocent people get hurt a lot of times as well.
Yes.
Justified is that?
Okay, what about civilian victims during military actions during the war? The moral law is quite clear. If you take a course on traditional ethics, I don't mean religious ethics, there is a major, major distinction between direct target and indirect. If I want to bomb tank formation, and there are civilians next, and while I'm bombing, some will die, yes. As long as there is a law of proportionality. If there is one tank in the middle of 10,000 people and I throw a nuclear weapon on that one tank, yeah, I'm a criminal. But proportionately, if there are victims, that's acceptable. If you have a direct target, I was very specific, there is an innocent child, I could save humanity by shooting it, I have no right to shoot the child. Right? You say it's never clear cut. Well, interestingly enough, often it is. There are people on both sides of, the Second World War, which were killing civilians as civilians, knowing that there were civilians as civilian hostages or bombing civilian, when you fire bombs, large area of, containing mostly apartments, containing mostly women and children, oh yeah, you're targeting civilians. Firebombing of Tokyo, of Hamburg, of Dresden, military crimes, no question about it. Yes?
Let's assume everyone adopts this notion
Yes.
that this is evil, and that what happens with military units who use it to their advantage and indeed hide among the civilian population, assuming that then the greater crime is to actually go after them. So there will be shooting at, let's say, military targets, but from the civilian population.
No. You could shoot if people hide. What happens if your enemy hides among the civilians? Yes, you should carefully target them. But if you, without any discrimination, bomb civilian population, you are a criminal.
That is an easy point. I'm making
No, it's not an easy point. No, it is not an easy point because every country so far have been doing it. So let us, You are bringing these hypothetical points, which are hypothetical. I'm bringing the points about what actually happened. Nazi units were not hiding in Dresden. Yes? Japanese kamikazes were not hiding in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were civilian targets. I don't want to go into some other wars which are close to your heart. There are similar things there. I could point to destruction of civilian targets with no evidence of any military presence there. That's what I'm talking about.
No, my question was not about, my question was about if we indeed do adopt this model, then you'll have to struggle with the next problem.
You will have to struggle. If we adopt this model, you say, could we lose? Yes. I'd rather lose than join, slaughter of innocents. This is the thing which, you have to face. My side is fighting. Should we win at all costs? My answer is no. There is one person before you.
I was going to ask his question.
You are? Okay. Then.
I was going to comment on his, that basically if you have a military unit that's dressed as a military unit, you'll either have civilians getting as far away from them as possible, as quickly as they can, but if they're not doing that, then you can, in some cases, consider them complicit. Because then they are choosing to hide the military unit, and in that case, they might no longer be considered civilians.
That's a slippery.
But
Yes, you are correct. It's a complicated issue. But one thing I want to sort of address is this unambiguous truth: you cannot target civilians ever. Even if the civilians make spaghetti, which military guys are going to eat. There have to be a clear separation. Because, during the last Great War, the argument was that you cannot separate anymore. That any German is fundamentally guilty. False. Right? But I'm not a German, I was on the other side. I wasn't around, but my parents were on the other side. But you have to decide that no, German civilians are German civilians. We are not going to bomb them. Japanese civilians are Japanese civilians. We will not bomb them. We have to once and for and again you said, but what if the enemy is not going to obey the rules? The question is, we should be better than the enemy. We have to once and for all to say that we will not respond in kind. If they start killing civilians, we will not kill civilians. If they start slaughtering babies, we will not slaughter babies. They say, we will perish, okay, so we will perish. I don't think it's survival is worth such price. Yes.
So it feels like during the millennia, the notion of really harsh treatments of whole people was universally accepted, recorded in the greatest books, practiced by all kinds of people towards other kinds of people, and therefore is one of the fundamental things about our civilization, because that's how it formed. And all of a sudden now, in the last short period of time, we try to detach ourselves from this notion and distance and say that this is all wrong and we should not do this and should do something else.
Okay, Valeris is asking, so since people have been doing it from times immemorial, why are we now making such a big deal about it?
It formed our civilization, didn't it?
No, it didn't. No, it didn't. As we shall see. As we shall see. I tried, if you attended all the lectures, you observed that for Greeks, that was utterly abominable thing. Utterly. Remember Trojan women? They didn't kill women. They sold them to slavery. But, I mean, the idea of total slaughter when it happened during the, if you remember, there was this Melian debate. Maybe you missed this part. There were several lectures dedicated to that. For Greeks, it was utterly not self-evident and utterly abhorrent.
Well, Alexander erased a few cities.
Alexander.
Yes, people break the laws. Here, okay, by the way, there is no evidence that Jews did it, but they wrote it. Okay? Greeks, very clearly, when we talked about Socrates, when we talked about Plato, for them, the greatest of the Greeks, the equivalent of scriptures for the Greeks, clearly says, no, not ever, not at any cost. My position is very consistent with position taken by the Greeks. And later on, we will come to this merger, the next lecture, I will start talking about Christianity. And we shall see that there will be, do not resist evil is going to be stated in the most public way. So I'll have to talk about it, however. Yes, no, it is not the foundation. It might be foundation of your civilization, but not of my civilization. But again, I would deny that. There are Jews who maintain this exclusive and terrible nationalistic thing. Most Jews do not. They still find it as utterly unacceptable. Most religious Jews whom I know, when I talk to rabbis, I find them very sympathetic to my point of view, no matter where they are, how they are not.
What about 200 years ago?
Well, trust me, rabbis were very sympathetic. They had no weapons. And the only thing they wanted then was no violence. I mean, whatever historical evil Jews might have done, again, I claim these are most likely did not happen. Not the last 2,000 years. When they were living in shtetls, they were not really exterminating Amalekites.
No, I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm talking about the other people who are part of the civilization.
Think about it. Look at the Jews. How did they survive? 2,000 years, people didn't exterminate them.
They tried.
No, they didn't. If they tried, there would be no Jews. Trust me. There was a tiny tribe, unprotected, with no military. Right? They lived in Poland. For example, most Jews lived in Poland. You might not know that. They were utterly unprotected, except by the law of the king and the church. And they survived. The reason most of the Jewish people are here is because they were not exterminated. Could have been. It was not military difficult thing to do. Right? The evidence to the contrary is precisely the survival of the Jews amongst the environment which, however unjustly, viewed them as an enemy element but did not exterminate. Did not. You wouldn't be around. I mean, what defenses did they have? In Poland, I mean, what could they do? They had no weapons. They were sort of totally exposed. They survived. Again, you say, well, there were bad Christians. Yeah, there were bad Christians. But nevertheless, in spite of that, the official policy was survival. There were rather unjust and totally unacceptable expulsions of the Jews. Expulsions, not exterminations. Right? From Spain, England, I could go through the list, long list. Poland was the only sort of place where Jews were welcome for many centuries. But extermination did not happen. by the way, Muslims did not exterminate the Jews. Could have, but didn't. When you look at all these great rabbis, Rashi, Ramban, I mean, where did they all live? Where did they all live? France, and Spain. Rashi was in France. They were not exterminated. They were large rabbinical schools, functioning, producing more work in Jewish theology than on Christian theology at that time. I mean, I don't know whether you realize how much Rashi wrote, just physically. It's like Leo Tolstoy, 90 volumes, right? So you have to work in peace. I mean, you couldn't write 90 volumes unless there were just some. No. I mean, our civilization is terrible, and I try to point something, but not like that. The idea of, extermination occasionally comes, and I pointed to specific sort of extermination of Native Americans is a terrible thing. We're going to talk about South America later in the course. It's another terrible story. But they guessed whom they used as an authority there. These were sophisticated Spaniards. They did not refer to the Bible. They referred to Aristotle. We will face it when we get to that. But yes, there were the most terrible things happened relatively recently during colonization period. And we have to face it. This is our history. This is us. Every time we discuss the illegal aliens in California, we have to think about what's the history of California, where people come from. But we don't want to trump them. Well, some people want, but it's difficult. But I don't think it's as bad as you make it be. Read history. Read the primary sources. You will see it's not as bad or not as good as you make it sound. Okay? You could have the room.